Hey guys, it's Paul and welcome back to my channel. I have my bachelor's in criminal justice and a minor in psychology, and I'm going to say that for the next 82 videos because I'm just so proud of myself. I'm also a board member of a nonprofit called Voices for the Silenced, and we help getting resources to families and friends of missing persons. We can really help on the social media side, setting up searches, and being the middleman between you and the police department. So if you need any help, please get a hold of us. And today we are going to talk about the highly requested West Virginia Penitentiary. Now, there is a lot when it comes to the West Virginia Penitentiary. I can't even put everything I found in this video. So please, if I don't mention something, feel free to put it in the comments. Like I said, I could not add everything I found. We would literally be here all day. But let's just get right in. On June 20th, 1863, West Virginia seceded from Virginia during the Civil War. And from 1863 to 1866, Governor Arthur Borman begged for a state penitentiary because due to the secession, there was such a lack of prisons in West Virginia. But the legislature just kept telling him, send them to other states or send them to county jails. We're not building a penitentiary. So things made a decline fast when it came to the prison system here. And Arthur Borman even was bringing up the fact that there was 9 inmates that escaped in 1865, and the news outlets were all about this story. They ate it up. And due to so much media following these 9 inmates escaping and highlighting how bad things were when it came to the prison system in West Virginia the legislature's hand was forced to finally be okay with a state penitentiary being built. So on February 7th, 1866, the legislature bought some land right outside Moundsville city limits. It was a 10-acre site and they sold it for $3,000, and the 10 acres would be used to build the state penitentiary. And most people who have visited the penitentiary can tell you it is right across the street from a Native American burial ground known as the Grave Creek Mound. The people buried in there were from the Adena tribe during 250 to 150 BC, and it is known to be one of the biggest cone-shaped mounds in the US. And not to skip forward a little bit, but this is one of the main reasons people think this place is haunted, along with all the horrible stuff we are about to get to. Moundsville seemed like the perfect place to put a state prison. It was only around 12 miles from the capital of the time, Wheeling, and it just worked really well being in this area at first. And in the summer of 1866, a wooden prison was built in that area for the meantime while they're building the other one. This really helped them figure out what in the layout they were thinking worked and didn't work, and it gave them time to research and realize they wanted to build a prison that was close to the state prison in Joliet, Illinois. In 1876 is when the true West Virginia Penitentiary as we know it was open. At the time, they held 251 male inmates, in which some of these prisoners helped build the prison. And almost immediately, construction started on other facilities for the West Virginia State Prison and workshops. One thing is that there are no architectural blueprints of this building that were ever found. Not even drawings, nothing. There is something that explains the understanding of the plan of building this building that was written by the board of directors in an 1876 report, but that's about it. They did talk about trying to encompass almost all of the 10 acres, in which the building would take up 7 of the 10 acres. So let's just go over the building itself because that's just a lot in general. I I've already said they based it off the state prison in Illinois, but it wasn't nearly as big as that state prison. It was a definite condensed version. They wanted to use Gothic architecture and really used elements you would see, honestly, in castles and things like that. And they really wanted to use this type of architecture because they saw it as being a symbol for strength. Now, there's different portions of this building. The first one we're going to talk about is the North Wagon Gate. It was the first thing built on the property, and it alone cost $363,061. And they used hand-cut sandstone. And like I said, the prisoners did help build this building, and they really kind of used the mindset of, we were going to be housed here, so we might as well make our new house nice. Now, the North Hall definitely had a few different areas in it. It had the kitchen, the dining area, a hospital, and a chapel. Cells were being brought into the North Hall in the 1890s, and North Hall really held the most violent prisoners based on what they were doing once they entered the prison. This is where solitary confinement was, so these people were in their cells 23 hours a day. And 2 different murders happened here. There was a biker guy named Danny, and he was stabbed in his eye by another inmate and died of the hemorrhage. And William Red Snyder also died here. He had murdered his parents and dismembered their corpses, so not many inmates really liked him very much. He fought people often and just overall wasn't great to be around. And because of the tension that had built up around Red, he unfortunately was stabbed 37 times right in front of his cell from inmates. And like I said, this is where they housed the most violent prisoners. And there was around 250 people that served a life sentence without the possibility of parole here. Now, there also was South Hall that had 224 cells, and these cells were 7 feet by 4 feet, I believe. This housed like the lower level inmates. It was just like a lot of first timers, so there wasn't much violent activity here. And then there was the administration building, which was a 4-story tower. It connected all the halls together. The hospital at some point was on the 2nd floor of this building, and it also held the female prisoners that were going to be entering West Virginia State Penitentiary, and it also held the women prisoners on the 3rd story, which would come at some point. And then the 4th story was where the warden's family lived. In 1894, finally an elevator was put in this building, and at some point a porch was added on. There were tennis courts and gardens here, and even a fish pond put in. So this was kind of a nicer area in the prison. And then there was the Sugar Shack. This was the recreation room. Horrific things happened in the Sugar Shack. There was gambling, drug deals, fighting, and murder in the Sugar Shack. Now, in the North Recreation Yard, at some point, there were some things added here. The workshops, outbuildings, wash house, and bakery was in that area. And in the 1900s, that is when they finally got electricity in that building. Now, let's talk about the yard in this place. This yard was 682.5 feet long and in 352.5 feet wide. It had a stone wall around it that was 24 feet high, and it was 5 feet thick at the bottom, but it would taper up to be about 2.5 feet wide at the top. But you could find the foundation of this wall 5 feet underneath the ground. And at each corner of the walls there was a turret that the guards would use to watch over all the prisoners that was inside the facility. In the front of the yard was thought to be the side that faces Jefferson Avenue, and that is where the main entrance is. Bricks were used to make walkways and roads inside the prison, and they also worked to improve the drainage and cleanliness of this area. And in the North North Recreational Yard is where the inmates played baseball, and they would even compete with local teams. Alright, so now that we know the layout, what was it really like inside the prison? In the early 1900s, the prison was honestly thriving. Education was a priority when it came to inmates, and they really worked to educate as many people as they could. And they finished building the school and library in 1900, and attending classes was built into their schedule of the day. And they used carpentry shop, paint shop, wagon shop, stone yard and brickyard, blacksmith, tailor, bakery, hospital, farming, and shoe shop to all these prisoners to get them as many skills as they wanted. And they were also able to work in the kitchen, the stables, and the wash house. This helped educate the inmates, but it caused the prison to be actually, for the most part, really self-sufficient. And at this time, the prison conditions were at its peak. Everybody in this prison, worker and inmates, were thriving. There were amazing choices in food. The uniforms gradually kept getting better. The inmates and the correctional officers' relationships were at an all-time high. And the library had over 5,000 books by 1900. And the ones that came into prison and couldn't read, they would take a night class to learn how. And the prison was even able to have a band that would play in the courtyard. And in 1921, they were even able to open their own coal mine about a mile away. This saved even more money on the prison's power source, and it saved close to $14,000 a year. And it gave the prison even more independence than it already had. This also gave some freedom to the inmates that were on good behavior and doing really well. They were able to stay at the coal yard under the supervision of the mine foreman. But also in 1921, prison labor did, and somewhere in 1921, they did start construction with prison labor once again, which ended in 1959. And in 1925, they gained a little bit more independence by drilling 2 water wells to be used for the state penitentiary for their water source. And in 1929, they decided to double the size of the penitentiary. There was starting to become a massive problem with overcrowding, and they were having to house 3 people to a cell. 2 prisoners would sleep in the bunks, while 1 would have a mattress on the floor. So they were begging for this construction to be done, but unfortunately there was a steel shortage thanks to World War II. So it took them 30 years to finish this construction. In the 1920s is when the female prisoners moved from the administration building to a new building in the North Recreational Yard. It did have its own dining room and kitchen, and they let these female prisoners do domestic type work around the prison. And in the 1960s is when they actually reached their peak amount of inmates at a time, which was 2,000. And because of this, there were shortages of staff to cover all these 2,000 inmates, right? So the correctional officers couldn't watch every place in this prison. It was huge. So the Sugar Shack actually ended up being a place that they did not bring correctional officers to surveil very much, which is how it got so incredibly violent there. So as you can tell, there was a massively fast decline in the prison conditions. 36 murders by this time had happened inside the prison, and this brought us to the 1979 prison break. On November 7th, 1979, 15 inmates escaped this prison. Ronald Turney Williams was one of them. He was serving time for killing Sergeant David Lilly of the Beckley Police Department. He managed to steal a prison guard's weapon and was able to make it outside, just wandering Moundsville. He did end up running into a state trooper, Philip Kessner, but the prisoners pulled him out of his car and Williams shot him. He did try to fire back, but he was severely wounded. So now there was 15 prisoners just roaming free. Ronald Williams roamed around free for 18 months, just out. He was even sending the police notes, just taunting them that they couldn't find him. He even got placed on the FBI's most wanted list. And while he was out, he ended up murdering again. It was during a robbery that he murdered John Bunchek of Scottsdale, Arizona. And they were also able to connect him to crimes in Colorado and Pennsylvania. They did end up cornering him at the George Washington Hotel in New York City in 1981. He was detained and brought back to West Virginia to complete his several life sentences. Arizona did want them to send him back for the John Bunchek case, but as of May 10th, 2023, he is still in West Virginia custody. And Marshall County Sheriff's Department and the Marshall County Sheriff Robert Leitner did point out there was some seriously poor communication skills going on between the prison officials and Moundsville police. He claimed that it was never mentioned on the scanner what was going on, and he found out 20 minutes after things started, which crimes happen really fast once they start. So a 20-minute head start is not a great thing, especially for a prison break. And Marshall County even said if they had heard about it sooner, they would have sent their guys up there, and they probably could have detained some of the prisoners right then. And a lot of this wouldn't have had to happen. And that is not the only horrific event that came from this prison either. It's time to talk about the 1986 riot. This is the longest riot in West Virginia history. It was on January 1st, 1986. The building was going under some major changes and major problems that were not getting addressed in time. There was a serious insect infestation, there was bad plumbing, and there was even more overcrowding than before because now they had exceeded 2,000 prisoners. There was not much security around the prison because it was a holiday. It was New Year's Day. Many officers had called off this day. But to be honest, most locks in this prison were picked at this point. Prisoners could roam freely if they really wanted to. At 5:30 p.m. this day, there was a group of prisoners known as the Avengers that ran into the mess hall. They tackled a Captain Glassick and 5 other officers and a food service worker to the ground. They handcuffed them with their own handcuffs and held knives to all their throats. And over the next 2 days, they had to let a man named Danny talk between the prisoners and the police. He was at some point deemed the Avenger president, even though he actually was not part of the original 20 that started any of this. More people during this time were taken hostage, but actually none of the hostages ended up getting seriously hurt. 3 inmates were killed though, and Governor Arch A. Moore Jr. went to the penitentiary to talk to the inmates. And he sat down and wrote out a new set of regulations for this prison and demanded they operate that way. National and local news was covering this story. It was huge. And during this time, the West Virginia Supreme Court did end up saying that the size of these cells were definitely cruel and unusual punishment to house as many people in them as they were trying to put in them. And the correctional officers during this time were criticizing on their weaponry that was chosen, their training for the weaponry they had. They said they were treated like animals and felt the fact that they were ignoring all these issues was the whole reason any of this happened. And then after the riot, they started arguing that nothing changed. So why in the world did they think that they should believe this would never happen again? Now, from 1899 to 1959, there were 94 executed from the prison. Hanging was the most common way until June 1931, and 80 men were hanged. hanged. The electric chair became the next most popular thing, starting in 1951. And an inmate actually built this chair, so good job, West Virginia Penitentiary, for having an inmate build a thing that will then kill them. And 9 men were executed in this chair until West Virginia got rid of capital punishment in 1965. There were 36 homicides that happened during the time of the prison, and in total 998 people died within this prison in its lifetime. And the people that were executed, or just bodies that were unclaimed prisoners, were buried in the cemetery. The graves had license plate markers, and it was about 3.5 miles from the prison. It was called the White Gate Cemetery. R.D. Wall was someone that died within the prison on October 8th, 1929. He had snitched on inmates, and he was attacked by 3 inmates going to the boiler room, and they used dull shanks to kill him. Frank Heyer was executed for murdering his wife. They were going to use the hanging method on Frank. When the trapdoor opened, his weight wasn't settled correctly, and it ended up completely decapitating him. And because of this, executions became invitation only and no longer was allowing just the whole public. And Bud Peterson was actually the last person killed in the hanging method. He was buried in the prison cemetery because his family refused to claim his body. Elmer Bruner was the last execution that happened in West Virginia in 1959. And this one's a little brutal. He was facing execution because he kidnapped a minister and killed him. The assistant was really nervous when putting the noose on him. And let's just say they pulled the trapdoor too early, and he fell 20 feet onto a stone walkway, and he was still alive. So they had to pull him all the way back up and hang him again. And he is thought to haunt the shit out of that place because that is, whew. This prison was ranked by the U.S. Department of Justice as one of the top 10 most violent correctional facilities in the U.S. It ended up closing in 1995. A lot of the penitentiary at this point was condemned, and they transferred most of their inmates to the Mount Olive Correctional Complex. And then there was a new facility built about a mile away in Moundsville. Now that we've got through all the horrific history, let's get to the funner part. The paranormal activity. So when I researched all of this, I found pictures that had mists, orbs, faces, and figures in them. There was a little bit of everything. It was crazy. And most of the time it seemed that people felt like someone was watching them. They talked about smells and echoes and just weird sounds. Some people would claim they heard voices, usually yelling about being trapped in there. Other people kind of felt tapped or shoved, or would claim they actually saw the prisoners walking the halls. And one of the first sightings was actually seen when the prison was still open in the 1930s. You could see someone walk around the maintenance area, and it freaked someone out so bad that they called security and everything for it. When you're walking through the prison, there's hot spots such as at death row, the psych ward, the chapel, shower cages, dining rooms, and in the basement you have a lot of equipment malfunction. Now the sugar shack, you can obviously hear a lot of arguing, just you feel tension when you're in the sugar shack, and there are massive cold spots here. Now North Wagon Gate is thought to have the most active ghosts and just overall has an evil feeling about it. The voices that are usually heard are here, and it is for sure haunted by Orville Atkins, the one who fell and had to be hanged again. It's said you can just hear his footsteps back and forth a lot of the time. Now, North Hall is where you can see a lot of the orbs or just shapes in the picture, shadows. And you do have equipment malfunction here too. You can hear the cell doors closing really well in this area, and quite a few people have felt a hand on their back here. There's a shadow man that is thought to be living in this area, the prison. If you know about shadow people, I talked about them in my Sleepy Hollow video. And this shadow person does hold like an intimidating feeling about him. To this day, West Virginia State Penitentiary is known to have housed the most violent prisoners in America when it came to murderers, rapists, and even the leader of the Aryan Brotherhood. It is now listed on the National Registry of Historical Places, and it is a huge tourist area for West Virginia. People come from all over to see this prison, and especially if they're paranormal investigators. It is known as the Alcatraz of the Eastern US. And a fun fact is Charles Manson had actually requested to come to this prison. He was from West Virginia, for those who don't know, and he claimed he wanted to be closer to family, but the warden told Charles Manson that he would come to the West Virginia State Penitentiary when hell freezes over. There are tours that you can take of the penitentiary, and they actually started a year after the prison shut down. That's a little too fast of turnover for my liking, but whatever. You can take 90-minute day tours, and around 30,000 people a year take these. And then there's also a 3-hour investigation tour you can do at night. And around 5,000 to 8,000 people do these night tours a year. There are tons of events that the West Virginia State Penitentiary holds between April and December, and you best believe that they go hard for Halloween season. But there also are law enforcement trainings that happen within this building. They definitely use it to help with mock riot situations. And that is all I have for the West Virginia State Penitentiary. But have you been to the West Virginia State Penitentiary? Have you had any like haunted interactions? Leave it below because I'm fascinated by this place. I want to go so bad. But thank you guys so much for watching. Like and subscribe for me, and hit that notification button. That way you're notified the next time I upload. There's still a GoFundMe going for Crystal Young, and if you haven't watched that video yet, you need to go and watch it so you know why her mom needs this PI so bad. And also there are stickers for sale. As always, they are $2 each, and all proceeds go to the Cold Case Foundation, so it is for a good cause. And thank you guys again so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.